The huge chat at the moment around the world, but particularly in South Africa, is about how to keep the media alive, how to keep journalism sustainable, how to get money that's left journalism back into journalism so we still have professional truth seekers, fact checkers, and tellers of what is actually going on in reality. And so that's why I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome just the person I want to talk to about this exact thing. He's the director of the Gibbs Media Leadership think tank. Please make some noise and a big warm welcome to Michael. Markowitz is here. Hey. How are you doing after that massive Competition Commission ruling last week? The recommendation being that Google needs to give between 300 and 500 million rand per year over the next 3 to 5 years to South African media houses to compensate for lost revenue, because as we've spoken about earlier in this show, Google's whole model, and Meta's also, is to extract ad revenue from work they've not done.
I've said publicly, Dan, that I think it's a really good report. I think it's a great start. It's not just the continent that's watching South Africa at the moment on how we're going to handle this, but the whole global South. Because media is not just struggling in South Africa or the continent, but it's a global problem. Even in the global north, you're finding news deserts where the business model is broken. We're seeing market failure at the moment, where it's impossible to sustain good, credible news without philanthropy, without people losing their jobs. A lot of news online publications are running at a very, very skeleton basis at the moment.
Tell me what a news desert is. I love that idea.
A news desert really refers to a sort of a locality or a city which no longer has a dedicated news outlet to that place. And you've seen it, particularly in the US, which had thousands of these small town newspapers. Those are gone or owned by hedge funds, or they just simply don't exist in the same way. So what's really the challenge at the moment, when we talk about market failure, we're not talking about Kodak being replaced by digital phones. That kind of disruption is fine. It's not a threat to democracy, okay? It really improved people's lives. But people are now seeing that without a credible news industry, without sustainable journalism, how do you hold democracy to account? How do you sustain democracy? And what the Competition Commission has done, which is very welcome, is they've linked the two issues. They said the sustainability of journalism is linked to the sustainability of democracy. And I think that's a very important point.
What I'm interested in is some of the unique things that make South Africa a challenging place for journalists. So I'd love for you to add more, but particularly what I think about all the time is that we've got 12 official languages. We've got many sub-dialects and different expressions of language. And as far as I understand, different languages have different densities, amounts of media outlets. So in certain languages in South Africa, there are just way fewer journalists. There are way fewer news media publications. There's even less funding in those languages of broadcast or writing than in broadly English or Afrikaans.
Well, you're absolutely right, Dan. So what they also did as the Competition Commission, they said in the same way that they've made choices in the algorithm to preference other content, they can make different choices. And they can use those choices to preference South African content, vernacular content, etc. Look, it's a provisional report. People have got till the 7th of April to comment, and then they'll do a final report.
And Google has already fought back against this report by saying that instead of 800 to 900 million rand per year that the Competition Commission speculates Google is making off of our news media, it was only 35 million in 2022. Do you expect this to be a long legal struggle, and even then a really hard thing to force Google to do anything good for our media?
Well, Dan, I hope not. Look, at least I'll say Google have engaged in the process, which is not the same that you can say about X or others. So I think we'll have to wait and see. I can't predict how they are going to react, but I do think that it could be a long legal struggle. I don't think Google will, my bet, and I could be wrong on this, withdraw from South Africa. I think we are the gateway to Africa in many respects. I think it's very important that they stay here. And I think that, there are many different ways that the Commission have said that you could respond. There could be negotiation, etc. But I think they've put down a very hard and fast point on the table, which says, if you don't agree, we will then impose a digital levy.
What is a digital levy?
Well, the levy will be on advertising, sale of advertising, because a lot of these companies don't pay tax in South Africa. So that's the important thing.
So the million, or in this case, it's probably hundreds of $1 million question, is if Google starts providing 5 to 10% of their digital ad revenue that they make of South African content to the South African media, how will it be split up?
Those details still have to be worked out, and I don't think it will be fair if you end up just favoring the big organizations. The whole point, and I think the Commission made this point, that diversity is very important. So you want to sustain the big guys because that's who are employing the most journalists, but you have to look at vernacular, community as well, but that is still to be decided.
What else needs to be considered to try and give South African news media its lifeblood back again?
I think there needs to be a change in the way that platforms operate. The choices that they make in the design of algorithms, I think they need to basically start favoring South African news, and there has to be a whole change in the way that they operate in the environment.
And South African news media themselves, what kind of adaptation needs to start happening that hasn't happened yet?
More investment in local journalism and also in AI. We have to use AI to help improve. It's not a threat only, it is an opportunity. And I think a lot of media haven't quite got their head around it.
How can AI help South African news media when AI seems to be the threat to South African news media?
Well, it's both. I mean, I think they're not paying for content and they have to pay. But I think you can use AI as an efficiency tool to make things work faster, to do the drudge work. But it's both a threat and an opportunity, and you've got to see it as such.
Do you think South African media is lagging behind the cutting edge news media world digitally in terms of digital adaptation, like using TikTok? I mean, the great example that I love is the Washington Post, who've got their own Wall Street Journal, who's got their own dedicated digital TikTok created team to express news on that platform in a way that is effective, rather than just regurgitating whatever they've written or broadcasted.
Well, look, Dan, it's a multifaceted crisis. I think a lot of people go, well, who cares? I get my news on social media. In fact, 72% of South Africans only get their news on social media. That's not necessarily a problem in itself. But the problem is that the social media platforms are deprioritizing, de-amplifying South African credible news. And you might say, how do we decide what's credible? That's the $1 million question. And what we've argued in this alliance is that if you remember of a self-regulatory body that has a code of conduct, like eNCA is a member of the BCCSA, your online outlets will be members of the Press Council. And if you remember and you subject yourself to a code of conduct that the public can complain about your content and there can be some accountability, that we think is important. And we think that the algorithms could be used to promote credible journalism. But another point, Dan, which I think also shows how unfair it is, there is zero accountability by the platforms for the content that appears on their platforms. You can pretty much go out and you can incite treason. Okay, you'll be arrested, but the platform can walk away. And I think what you've seen, and it started in the US, when they started these platforms and the internet really got off the ground, they gave them immunity from liability. But journalists, newspapers have to check facts. They will be held accountable in this country for on South African law if they defame people, if they get the facts wrong. Whereas platforms, we're just a dumb pipe. We've got no control over the content, and that's actually not true.
Thank you so much to the wonderful Michael Markowitz for your time. We really appreciate it. And that is our show. Thank you so much for